Welcome everyone to Meditation Mount. We're here in the eastern end of the Ojai Valley in Southern California, and we're gathered today for February's live broadcast of View from the Mount. And we're going to be exploring a theme together which I've called Migrating from Cruelty to Kindness. But before we dive into this theme, let's stop and realize that those of us gathered on the call today, we are located in various time zones around the world. And so we're going to begin by gathering our forces, creating a receptive group field together in which we can be impressed as we inquire the way together. That's a favorite phrase of mine. We're here to inquire the way together. This is not a lecture. It's me sharing some thoughts, exploring things together, and for us to take the time to allow new insights to emerge. So let's begin by taking a series of slow, gentle breaths to bring ourselves present in the here and now. And as we continue to breathe deeply and gently, we let go of any tensions that may have built up in our physical body. We release them. We relax. And then we become aware of our emotions, our feeling body. And if there are any waves on this emotional ocean, allow them to gently subside so that the waters become calm and still. And continuing to breathe deeply and gently, we let go of any extraneous thoughts that may be swirling in our mind. Allow them simply to disappear so that our mental sky is clear, free from all clouds. And we experience serenity. And from this place of poise, we enter the silent space of the heart and feel the pulsing of life with every beat of our heart. And we both sense and see an eternal flame burning at the center of our heart. This is the fire of love that burns inside the heart of all creation, each one of us. And standing in this love, we visualize lines of lighted love connecting everyone on this call, heart to heart, to heart to heart, forming a matrix of loving communion among and between us all. And inside this group heart, we open ourselves to receive new insights and new wisdom as we inquire the way together. Thank you. So these are not the easiest of times in which to be alive. We've only got to look around the world to witness what I would call our better angels and our demons engaged in a tense and drawn-out struggle for dominance, because each of them are striving to gain the upper hand and assume governance of our lives. I know that myself. Some days I feel that my better angels are directing my life, and other times other little subcurrents come up and I realize there are temptations and there are patterns that rear their head. And so it's this constant dance of evolution. I would say our current civilization does not always bear the hallmarks of a civilized society. So what do I mean by civilized? So I looked up in the dictionary and it simply said this: civility is a civilized conduct, especially courtesy and politeness. So I would like to say that it would appear that we are being plagued with a rash of uncivil behavior in the form of cruelty, callousness, and caustic criticism. And there's a phrase in spiritual psychology says that we are so much more than how we're currently behaving. And that's how I feel about us as a species. The truth is, we are so much more than how we're currently behaving, because there's a greater destiny and promise waiting to be revealed. There's a more perfect union seeking to be established by us as a unified field, as a family, as a species. So let's begin to look at, where do these lower tendencies to diminish each other stem? And what possible measures can we take so we may establish right human relations among and between us all? So I'm going to share some observations, and then we're going to go in and explore some things together. So when I view our society from the vantage point of a detached observer, without assigning blame or judgment, simply witnessing, this is what comes to mind concerning what I would call the prevailing psychological climate and our present predicament. I name cruelty. For me, cruelty is the heartless act of intentionally harming another person, whether this be through physical abuse and torture, emotional wounding, or by vitriolic thoughts and acerbic comments. We could say more about cruelty, but it really is a heartless act. It has nothing to do with love. The Agni Yoga teaching reinforces this point by saying the most deadly dagger is not at the belt, but at the tip of the tongue. Sometimes it will have to be understood that the spoken and also that which is thought are indelible. So basically what we think and what we put out in the ethers is real. Anytime we speak a word that is cutting, a cutting remark, it actually does cut at a spiritual level. Then the other word I used was callousness. I believe callousness comes from a lack of heart. It's an absence of empathy for our fellow citizens. It's also a blindness to the universal fact that we are all interrelated aspects of the one life. So for me, callousness is cold-hearted, and it automatically severs and disconnects us from the natural fellowship and communion of our shared humanity. It may not be intentional. It just may be that we are so self-centered. We don't have feelings for others. We're so wrapped up in our own survival. There's a cold-heartedness. It could be because we've been wounded before. Whatever the reasons are, it's not a helpful behavior to have in the field. And then the third one that I mentioned was criticism. And criticism often arises, in my experience, from a need to denigrate, to put down another person, to show that one is superior. And if we appreciate the implications of the spiritual axiom that we always refer to, energy follows thought, then it's absolutely clear that harsh and constant criticism floods and fills the ethers with a virulent poison. And I believe that what we often fail to realize is that ultimately criticism damages the one who criticizes through their directed and focused stream of thought. But let's remember, it hurts even more the one who's the object of our criticism. So we criticize and we harm, but there's a blowback. We also are harmed. And then there's unvoiced criticism. It's also harmful because unvoiced criticism is held and focused powerfully inwardly. And therefore, it is a live energy. And therefore, when we have unvoiced criticism, it's like this continuous steady stream of negative energy that is silently transmitting from us. And this is often sent forth on the wings of jealousy, ambition and pride, with the belief that the one who criticizes is in a position to understand correctly and therefore knows what is right and best in that situation. So often when I become the critic, it's, well, I know best. And therefore you're wrong, I'm right. All three of these behaviors are deemed to be traits of the separated self. So what do I mean by the separated self? I see it as the personality still functioning in an isolated survival mode, maybe living in fear and competition with its surroundings. And I'd like to call upon Dr. Roberto Assagioli, who's the founder of the spiritual psychology psychosynthesis and also the inspiration behind our work here at Meditation Mount. He was a psychologist. He worked closely with Jung. He worked with Freud. He also studied the Alice Bailey teachings on esoteric psychology. So he had a deep understanding of human nature. And he wrote a paper on personal development, and he shared some observations on this topic. What I'd like to do is to share a few quotes from that. So this is what he said. What we are witnessing here is moral mutilation, which is, in a sense, more serious than physical mutilation. And those responsible for causing such states in others have much to answer for. The only excuse they can claim is that they are often unaware of the harm they are doing. But the time has come for such psychological crimes to cease. Curious as it may seem, criticism serves to satisfy the desire for communion with others, though it is only partially successful and destructive in its effect. This apparent paradox should not surprise us too much. Indeed, what can most readily unite and reconcile people and groups of human beings? It's having a real or assumed enemy in common. And then Dr. Assagioli goes on to say, we should not be surprised, therefore, that people are all too eager for the pleasurable fellowship and agreement that comes from sharing their criticism of others. This is not true fellowship or union, however. It is merely a temporary, superficial coming together because it is based on separateness and not on unity. Then he wraps it up with this statement. Everyone must come to realize that criticism, disparagement, pessimism, and forecasts of failure are nothing less than poisons, whereas loving understanding, appreciation, encouragement, and a healthy optimism are life-giving. They summon dormant energies and can lead to a wonderful inner blossoming and to precious works. So that's what Dr. Assagioli had to say on it. There's a lot to digest there, but it basically says the energy follows thought. So whatever we put out in the world has an effect. So what I'd like to do now is to explore the question of why in so many sectors of our society do we appear to be behaving in such an uncivil manner towards each other? And I'd like to do this in more depth through a couple of different lenses, not just the psychological or the spiritual psychology lens. I'd like to look for a moment at the larger cosmic picture and to view this particular period of what I call dynamic transition from one age to another. Because we find ourselves living in a passage, it's a period of stellar alignment when the Piscean age is giving way to the Aquarian age, and when the dark era of Kali Yuga is finishing and the golden cycle of Satya Yuga is beginning. And the Agni Yoga teaching provides insights into this time of transition. And I'd like again just to share a quote from Agni Yoga on this. So the transition from Kali Yuga to Satya Yuga, and we're right there in this passageway. Falsehood and darkness fill the end of Kali Yuga. One must realize this in order not to lose one's strength. It is impossible to avoid the dark days, and only a knowledge of their cause will give one the patience to survive them. Hence, in this Kali Yuga cycle of death and destruction for the age of the mind, there is already emerging a new paradigm of the Satya Yuga cycle or golden age, a renaissance for the human spirit that will set the tone for the age of Aquarius. So basically, it's saying that each age has its own characteristics. And we're coming out of an age which has been filled with the darkness, where we, in order to complete this cycle, there are 4 yugas, and Kali Yuga is the final, the 4th yuga, and Satya Yuga is the beginning of the next cycle. So this is a momentous time. And there's always great turmoil and upheaval during these critical times of transition as the old passes away and new forms emerge. So I like to think of it in this way. The ending of an age or the death of a civilization is not the death of the human spirit. I want to repeat that. The ending of an age or the death of a civilization is not the death of the human spirit, but simply the dissolution of the forms that have carried that spirit to this point in time. Remember, forms are temporary, spirit is eternal. And the spirit is always seeking to regenerate, create new forms that can better serve its deep purpose. So that's why we're seeing a lot of things fall apart. I know in our own personal lives, things fall apart, and sometimes they fall apart for good reasons, because we've said yes to life. And when I say yes to life, I've declared a direction. I want to be of service. I want to get in touch with my soul, whatever the striving is. And that sets in motion a whole process of shedding that which is the not self, of releasing the things that are no longer part of who I am. They no longer serve. So what I'd like to do is examine another perspective. We looked at the cosmic one, the Aquarian age, after the Piscean age, the Kali Yuga, moving to Satya Yuga. I'd like to look at another one offered by Alice Bailey in her book, The Consciousness of the Atom. Now, this is a book she wrote herself. This isn't one that she took dictation from the Master DK. This is a book she wrote herself. It's a compilation of a series of lectures that she gave in New York in 1922. And she points out an important turning point in the life of both of an atom and of a human being. And I believe that by reading this together, it may help us better understand the present psycho-spiritual dynamics we are experiencing. So let me share one more slide. I'm going to read this and then I'm going to unpack it a little with you. As we have already seen, the first or atomic stage developed by means of selfishness, or the self-centered life of the atom, whether the atom of substance or the human atom. The second stage grows to perfection by the sacrifice of the unit to the good of the many, and of the atom to the group in which it has place. This stage is something which we as yet know practically little about. It is what we often vision and hope for. So I came across this quote last week, and it suddenly opened a door to a whole new understanding, and I want to share that with you and relate it back to the topic that we're trying to understand now. Why are we so mean to each other when basically there is goodness in the human heart? So Alice Bailey clearly explains how self-centeredness, the focus on the self at the center, self-centeredness at the center, is the first stage in the evolutionary life before we expand our awareness beyond this orbital limitation and before we engage in greater constellations of lives as a co-contributor. And in earlier View from the Mount programs, we've referred to this shift from the self-centered to the greater awareness as a shift from ego-centric living to an eco-centric awareness and living. So in eco-centric, our life is lived in service to the good of the whole. And it's not just spent caretaking the insular world of the separated self. So I'd like to go a little deeper in this and share with you some insights that I had. So during the 1920s, when these lectures were given by Alice Bailey, other sources inside the ageless wisdom tradition were also talking about the atom. And in Agni Yoga, it was hinting that in the coming decade, humanity would be stimulated to discover the secret to unlocking the power hidden inside the heart of the atom. And as we know, these predictions proved to be accurate. And if you go back to Alice Bailey and the books that she wrote down on behalf of the Tibetan master, the Master DK, DK indicated that the reason humanity was stimulated and was able to develop the capacity to access the power of matter itself was to provide a way of liberating humanity from the imprisonment of material dependency. He explained in one of his books that the plan was for atomic power to provide free energy for the whole world population, so we could utilize our time in higher order cultural activities and not be slaves of material production. Like you've got to get up each day and you've got to go and work in order to keep the wheels moving. With access to this profound energy, the atomic energy, he believed it would liberate humanity. That was the intent. And for me, this is in keeping with the second stage of growth that Alice Bailey named earlier, in which the part moves from self-centeredness to serve the whole. So this revelation and this release of atomic energy was intended to serve the whole. But as we know, however, instead of the power of the atom being freely shared and made available as a liberating universal energy source to everyone, it was weaponized. It was commercialized because at that time, human consciousness was still trapped in separateness and competition and had not yet made the shift to thinking and acting for the common good. I still believe we're in that stage. We haven't really made the shift so that our society is based on the common good. And then I started to reflect that there's a difference between energy produced by fission, which is the splitting of the atom of matter, and the power that's generated by fusion when the elements join together and when they release their combined energy as a potent nuclear emission. So I went up and just looked at the scientific explanation. And basically, science informs us that fission occurs when a neutron slams into a larger atom, forcing it to excite and split into two smaller atoms, and additional neutrons are also released that also can initiate a chain reaction. So when each atom splits, a tremendous amount of energy is released. Then it goes on to say that fusion occurs when two atoms come together to form a heavier atom, in the same way as two hydrogen atoms fuse to form one helium atom. And this is the process that powers the sun and creates huge amounts of energy. It's several times greater than fission. So the energy generated by fusion is greater than fission, and also fusion doesn't produce the highly radioactive fission byproducts. So I was fascinated by fusion, and I wanted to look at this because in the spiritual teachings, the word fusion has an important role in our spiritual development. So in our human journey towards enlightenment, there are said to be two stages of fusion that lead to the release of our inner power, our nuclear power. And the first fusion occurs when the soul and its incarnated vehicle, i.e. the personality, the combination of our physical, our emotional, and our mental vehicles, when they become sufficiently integrated and aligned. And when that alignment takes place, there is a release of energy from the soul. This, I believe, is the true solar power, the solar power, S-O-U-L-A-R, solar power. And this stage of development is beautifully expressed in the well-known saying of Teilhard de Chardin, and I'll read it. I'm sure you've heard it before. The day will come after harnessing the ether, the winds, the tides, gravitation, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And on that day, for the second time in the history of the world, humans will have discovered fire. So let's look at this fusion. I talked about the first fusion being when the soul and the personality integrate. Now, the second fusion, when you read the spiritual teachings about initiation and our progress as enlightened beings, the second fusion happens when this soul-infused personality that we created through the first fusion becomes the receptacle, the fireplace, the safe, the welcoming heart and hearth, which can receive the fire of heaven. And this fire of heaven is often called monadic fire. So unlike the splitting of the physical atom and the release of the life energy hidden in matter, this second fusion actually allows the fire of heaven to be accessed and harnessed on earth through a higher union. It's like the union of the atoms. Therefore, I suddenly realized the migratory journey from cruelty to kindness that we're exploring today can also be tracked through a scientific understanding of how the light of consciousness and the fire of love are sequentially revealed through the continuous mystery of the evolutionary process. So these were some thoughts I had in the last few days, and I have no scientific proof for what I'm about to say. So please treat it as a possibility to consider and not as a statement of truth. So here's what I came upon a couple of days ago. While reflecting on Alice Bailey's consciousness of the atom, I understood that the first or atomic stage that she mentioned, which is developed by the means of selfishness, where you're focused on the center, the self-centered life of the atom, is akin to fission. This is where we release energy through fission. And the second stage that grows to perfection by the sacrifice of the unit to the good of the many and of the atom to the group in which it has place, as she stated, corresponds more to the release of energy through the process of fusion. By fusion, we are adding things together. We're not splitting them. I mean, it's a very basic way of looking at fission and fusion. But I know in the spiritual journey, the ageless wisdom teachings always talk about fusion because the whole journey is back to oneness. The many returning to the one. Therefore, it's a remembering of the dismembered parts. It's a putting together of all the pieces, all the pixels of this one entity, the soul of humanity. So before we move on, I just want to invite us to take a few moments to reflect on our life stage. Where are we? Are we still inside the first stage of being self-centered? Are we moving towards thinking about others, the good of the whole? This is not meant to be judgmental. It's just a time to reflect on where am I? And without blame or judgment, just an overview of, what is my relationship to energy? So from this larger perspective and with whatever thoughts came into you, let's move to refocus inside the daily reality that we've created as a society. And let's take stock of where we're at. And let's see how we can best progress and create a more refined and kindly way of living together, because this is moving from cruelty to kindness. It's really basically Kali Yuga to Satya Yuga. And as we've seen with the phrase energy follows thought, the simple truth is the corrosive psychic climate in which we live is therefore the result of our collective thoughts and actions. I believe we would be delusional if we were to believe that it's possible to talk ourselves out of a situation we've behaved ourselves into. I know it's not possible in my life. I come up with excuses and I come up with all these reasons, but you can't talk yourself out of a situation you've behaved yourself into. And there is a wonderful phrase in the Agni Yoga teachings put out by the master who's responsible for the Agni Yoga teaching, the Master M. He's very no nonsense. I love his approach. And he basically says, do not offer me promises and excuses. Show me your intent by your actions. And I guess that's what we're being invited to do now. It's like, show me, do it. So this needed migration from what I would call a cruel and hostile environment to one that is life-affirming and deeply nourishing, I believe will only occur when we shift from being self-centered and aggressively defensive, and when we enter into a new relationship with life where we recognize the interconnectedness of all things, the interconnectedness of all people, and we realize that harming any one part harms the whole, of which, incidentally, we are each an integral and vital part. So when you realize that there is this seamless web of life, you cause no harm. So I'd like to draw upon a little more wisdom contained in the Agni Yoga teaching. It says, therefore, I am so concerned that you should not lose a single opportunity for manifesting friendliness. The best fuel should be preserved for the fire of the heart. The store of friendliness generates true compassion, which is directly opposed to the cruelty of fanaticism. Fanaticism knows only the egoism which presumptuously says all or nothing, and since all is impossible, there remains nothing. So that's a quote from Agni Yoga. So there are many ways in which we can help reweave the torn fabric of our society in order to create a more just and joyful world. Because I believe that each of us in our hearts, we're looking to create a world that's founded on the unified field of caring and sharing. For me, those are the characteristics of Satya Yuga. Those are the characteristics of a compassionate society. It's caring and sharing. So, as I say, there are many ways to contribute to the building of this future. And these include prayer, meditation, subtle activism, socially responsible campaigning, community service. There's a whole list of it. And I'd like to give one example of prayer. And I want to use one particular prayer. For instance, at 5 o'clock in the evening each day, thousands of people in their respective time zones around the world sound the affirmation that I'm going to read in a moment to create a continuous rolling wave of potent prayer around the planet. So let's read this together and then let's see what it says and why it's important. So at 5 o'clock in the evening, you're invited to say this. May the power of the one life pour through the group of all true servers. May the love of the one soul characterize the lives of all who seek to aid the great ones. May I play my part in the one work through self-forgetfulness, harmlessness, and right speech. So that comes from the tradition that we're part of here at Meditation Mount. This is something that the master DK, the Tibetan, brought through and said, this is a useful prayer to use each day. So may the power of the one life, the universal force, pour through the group of all true service. Everyone who said yes to life, let us be instruments of peace. Let us be vessels of service. May the love of the one soul characterize the lives of all who seek to aid the great ones. Now, this phrase catches some people, to aid the great ones. It simply means that we're part of a greater system of being. The planet itself is a sentient being, and there are levels of consciousness within the planet that have evolved further than we have. And we call this the fifth realm, the realm of souls, the realm of enlightened souls, the masters, whatever we want to call them. And that's where we're headed on our journey to enlightenment. So this is part of cooperating with all the lives that are part of this sentient being called planet Earth. And then it says, may I play my part in the one work, in this one destiny of planet Earth through self-forgetfulness, harmlessness, and right speech. So I'd like to look at what that means. So the Tibetans said that this collective practice actually strengthens our inner link with the source of life, because it's saying, may the power of the one life pour through. And it weaves closer connection amongst the global network of those who seek to serve the common good. May the love of the one soul pour through the group of all true service. And the teacher, the Master DK, who gave out this prayer, he said that by practicing and perfecting the three qualities mentioned in the final line during the course of a lifetime, will produce in any one person huge advances in the expansion of human consciousness, and it will greatly assist in the building of a new civilization. That's a bold statement, that's strong. And that final line is self-forgetfulness, harmlessness, and right speech. So I'd like to take those one at a time and just share what comes to mind when I name that word. And I invite you also to have your own understanding of what it means. Once again, this is not intended to be a lecture. This is intended to stimulate the field so that we can receive new insights. We have personal ahas. We may even have a group aha together. So I see self-forgetfulness as a state of awareness in which we know ourselves to be part of a greater identity and reality, and where the illusion of separation has been dissolved. By forgetting self, we do not lose our personal identity. We do not lose our true self with a capital S. Instead, we gain a greater sense of self as we shift from I to we, the part to the whole. Because we've identified with something greater. Therefore, we've increased our awareness. We've become more group consciousness. So self-forgetfulness is a way of standing even more clearly in our own sovereignty. Because what we're forgetting is the lower self. We're not caught up with self. Now let's move to harmlessness. For me, harmlessness is a state of being that allows the intrinsic goodness of the human spirit to flow through and from us as our contribution to life. It is a very powerful Buddhist practice, harmlessness. So for me, it's the spreading of unconditional love in every moment, to everyone, to every being, to everything, because the natural urge of the soul is always to give freely of its light and its warmth to all. The natural urge of the soul is to love. And harmlessness is how we show that love to each other. So that's my sort of encapsulation. Then let's move to right speech. So for me, right speech is a sounding forth into the world of beneficent formulated thoughts that are life-affirming and promote the full flowering of the human spirit. Right speech is an active ingredient in the practice of harmlessness. So you could legitimately ask the question, if there's right speech, is there such a thing as wrong speech? Well, what we've been exploring today points to the fact that there are non-constructive and unhelpful tendencies, the way we speak, the way we behave. And the clearest example of this would be the hateful and critical language that we referenced earlier, the dagger of the tongue. Unfortunately, what we're witnessing at the moment in our world is a proliferation of unhelpful and unkind speech, which appears to be the new lingua franca of the Twitter sphere. I call the Twitter sphere the growing band of instant communication, the social media sphere that envelops the earth. It permeates our society. There's nothing wrong with it. But what it's doing at the moment is allowing us not only share wonderful thoughts and new ideas, but it's fueling our need to compare, to comment, to judge, to put down. So you've got both the positive and the negative aspects of the Twitter sphere, as I call it. So how do we get out of this? How do we get out of the hole? Well, the first thing to do is stop digging, is to be mindful of what we say, what we're emitting. And I want to give a quote from Henry James, because he made a wonderful statement, which I think is elegant, it's simplistic, it's powerful. This is what he said. Three things in human life are important. The first is to be kind. The second is to be kind. The third is to be kind. I mean, for me, that just did it. Of course. And then I came across a paragraph in Agni Yoga that sort of reinforced what Henry James said. And I'd like to read it to you now. Magnanimity can follow only after heartlessness has been cast out. Nothing is more frightful than that heartlessness which is in the pretended magnanimity that lives in the heart of egoism. Then it offers this prayer, from every manifested terror, let us turn to magnanimity. The magnanimity is, you can feel it in the word. It's sort of onomatopoeic. It's like magnanimity means the sort of the expansion of the heart, the ability to hold more in love. So for me, that's what it means to move from an age of cruelty to an age of kindness. It's not just idealistic thinking. It's actually shifting the way we show up in the world each day. So whenever I'm in need of a gentle reminder of how to comport myself each day, I always return to a 12-word distillation of the Buddhist teachings that I came upon a few years back that really talks about right human relations. 12 simple, powerful words, which for me are my mantra of intent. And this is what it sounds like. Only think, say, and do that which is kind, helpful, and true. Only think, say, and do that which is kind, helpful, and true. So I'd like to take a brief pause now and invite you into an experiment. I'd like to conduct an emissions test. I know I had to go and take my car in for an emissions test so it could get new tags and be legal to drive on the road. So we have to go and test our cars, our vehicles, unless you're driving an electric vehicle, for an emissions test. So I invite us now to take a few moments to objectively review your thoughts, your words, and your actions of the past period. And do this without blame or judgment, just to objectively observe. What has your earthly vehicle, your physical, emotional, mental vehicle, been emitting? Has it been emitting beneficent elements or harmful particulates into the collective atmosphere? So just take a few moments just to do an emissions test. I'm not asking you to see whether you pass the emissions test, but to be mindful. To be mindful means to be aware. To be aware means that we can change something. So just go inside and do a quick emissions test. What am I putting out into the ethers each day, with each thought, with each feeling, with each action? So I had to get an emissions test and had to pass it in order to be able to drive my car on the roads here in California. I don't have to pass an emission test to show up in life each day. I can be spewing all kinds of bad stuff. Now, if I get really bad and break the law, I may be incarcerated, things will happen to me. But we control our own emissions. I think that's the bottom line. If energy follows thought, and we're in charge of this vehicle, and this vehicle is the incarnated representative of the soul on earth. So the whole idea of evolution is to create a vehicle in time, space, and substance that can really do justice to the life of the soul. And that was the first fusion. When the soul and the personality are integrated and aligned, that's that first coming together and release of solar power. And then we said the second fusion was when that soul-infused personality is able to receive the highest possible fire on the planet, the monadic fire. So I'm saying that, whether we preside over a nation as a president, or whether we are a leader in our community, or if we've just assumed full responsibility as stewards of our own life, our own ecosystem, our own universe of self, what we transmit through thought and word affects the whole system. I know I've said this many times, but once we realize this, we understand why in some of the mystery schools you weren't allowed to speak for the first couple of years. It was for your own protection. So you didn't get yourself into trouble. You didn't unnecessarily harm by wrong speech. So you understood the power of silence, and that out of silence is born everything. Silence is the synthesis of all sound. So I believe in sort of wrapping up this exploration today. The truth is that what we need is an immediate opening of the heart. We need a mass migration from what I call the harsh and barren land of cruelty into the rich and nourishing realm of loving kindness, if the deep promise of humanity is to finally flourish and flower on earth. I do believe we have a destiny. And as a gardener, I know when I plant a seed, I know inside that seed is the promise of the fully blossomed flower or the vegetable. Whatever is inside the seed is there as a promise. But it can only be shown by being sown and grown. And that's what we're doing here on earth together. That's what we're doing together as a society. So what kind of flower do we want to grow in our garden? What kind of society do we want to create together? I believe that the true and lasting change that we all seek starts from the deep place within each one of us, from our souls, and it moves out like rays of the sun to warm and to illumine the cold, dark places of our collective psyche. For me, this is what it means to walk the pathway of right human relations. Right human relations isn't just right relations amongst people. It's right relations with all beings. The rocks, the plants, the animals, the birds, the so-called invisible realms, the angels, the devas, all the beings that comprise this multidimensional ecosystem that we know as planet Earth. So I believe that when we walk this pathway of right human relations, it inevitably leads us from the shadowland of inhumane actions into the kindly light and warmth of a soul-centered society. And that's the work we're attempting to do here at Meditation Mount. We do it through creative meditation. And I've given this example before. The buildings we have here at Meditation Mount, Florence Garrigue, who was the founder of Meditation Mount about 55 years ago, had a vision of what she wanted to build. So she employed an architect, Zelma Wilson, and the architect rendered these architectural drawings. And then they gave these to a contractor, and then there were subcontractors. And then over time, buildings emerged that corresponded to the inner vision that Florence had. This is really the heart and soul of creative meditation. We hold a vision of a future of loving kindness, a society that is based on caring and sharing. And then we clothe it in love. We clothe it in qualities. We magnetize it. We create the inner architecture of a future society. And once we magnetize that, we send it out like seeds into the ethers. And part of the building work of creating these seeds, these future seeds that contain the promise of the Satya Yuga, is to focus on these three principles that we work with here at Meditation Mount, because they form the bedrock. You can't just build your house on shifting sands. It has to be built on bedrock. And the three principles that we work with are essential divinity, goodwill, unanimity. The principle of essential divinity says that inside of each one of us is a spark of the Creator, a note of the original word of creation. So each one of us is a fractal of the one life. We're the microcosm of the macrocosm. Therefore, each one of us needs to be honored, celebrated. Therefore, each one is sacred. All life is sacred because it isn't just people. This spark lives in all creation. Then you have the principle of goodwill. And goodwill is the affirmation that love is the lifeblood of all our relationship. It's sort of the glue that holds everything together. Because love, as we understand from the ageless wisdom teachings, is the reason behind all of creation. It's so that love can be expressed. Now, it's of a nature that we don't fully comprehend at the moment. We understand it when we open our heart. And then the third principle is the principle of unanimity that basically said one soul, one anima, una anima, one soul, unanimity. We're part of this seamless web of life, this interdependent, multidimensional entity. Therefore, there's no separation. You are my sister, you are my brother. There is no other. There is no other. And we believe that having a society built on this foundation means it will be just, it will be joyful, it will be respectful. It will represent, if you like, on the outside, the promise on the inside, which is why you hear Satya Yuga being called a golden age. A golden age is when things flower, because gold is shown to be the highest metal. It represents the full flowering. And Solomon's gold, as we know from the Bible, is wisdom. So what we are growing here in the earth garden together is the gold of loving wisdom, loving kindness. And this flowering takes many lifetimes, many seasons, many yugas. And this is where we happen to be right now. So in closing, I simply express this prayer. May we joyfully walk this path together, one step at a time and one day at a time, as we reveal the deep promise and potential that lives inside the seed that is our one humanity. It's up to us as gardeners, as soul gardeners, to grow this together. So thank you for your presence and your participation today. And thank all of us for our collective willingness to respond to the deep call of the soul of humanity, this deep call to usher in a new era, an era of loving kindness. It's not a pipe dream. It's a dream, but a dream has to be realized through action, by doing it, by being it, by behaving it. And that's up to us. So, how are we doing with our emissions test? So on behalf of the whole stewardship team here at Meditation Mount, I bid you good night, and may many blessings be showered on our shared work in the days ahead and in the journey ahead, because we are inquiring the way together. We're walking the path together as one humanity. So deep gratitude from all of us here, and namaste. I salute the divinity in you.